Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Friendly Circle Berlin Monday Workshop. And this evening, as we do on the first Monday of every month, we have Dr. Alan Berger with us. And Alan has been a wonderful addition to our group and our emotional sobriety. He's been doing these workshops for almost 4 years now for us monthly, and this current series is the emotional sobriety and the 12 steps, the principle and emotional sobriety core value of each step. So right now, this month, we're up to step 8. And so, Alan, it's wonderful to have you with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Well, I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can begin our discussion. Okay, so we're looking at emotional sobriety in the 12 steps, and we're really looking at how the 12 steps impact emotional sobriety. But here's my version of the set aside prayer for us today. Spirit of the universe, please help me set aside everything I think I know about myself, about love and relationships, about my recovery journey, and about emotional sobriety and you, for an open mind to help me discover new possibilities. That's the way I like to define recovery, is really the discovery is new possibilities. Now, it's important to understand that the primary goal of working the 12 steps is to discover and achieve an ongoing practice of emotional sobriety. I've been in recovery for over 53 years. I've attended thousands of meetings, and I've only heard that mentioned a handful of times in the program. So it is the best kept secret in the program. In fact, what we know is that at its deep sense of the meaning, this is the way that Bill says it, that AA is a quest for freedom. First, of course, our immediate objective is a quest for freedom from our addiction, whatever that may be. But without that, it's hard to do the work. Although you're going to see that sometimes that happens simultaneously. We'll talk about that later. But once we get the plug in the jug, the real work starts to take place. And that's this emotional sobriety that we've been talking about. So Bill even stated in the 12 and 12 that here, and this is in the last paragraph when he's discussing step 12, he goes, here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. So it's an explicit goal of working the steps is to achieve emotional sobriety. Well, obviously begs the question, what is emotional sobriety? We've been talking about that for a long time now, but I'll define that a little bit later on. But here's just the way that I've been thinking about it more recently. That emotional sobriety is a process that helps us transcend a consciousness of emotional dependency, meaning that we need our environment to support us to be okay, moving us towards a consciousness of emotional freedom or emotional autonomy. But to transcend our emotional dependence, we first have to become aware of how our self-esteem and behavior is determined by those gravitational forces created by what Bill called our almost absolute dependence on support from our environment. There is no way around this experience. And we call it the paradoxical theory of change. You change when you own who you are and what you're doing, not when you try to be someone you're not. So the first step in AA is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Once I admit my powerlessness, I'm able to discover another power. But until I admit it, then I get caught in this vicious cycle of trying to get power over something I'm powerless over. Same is true with emotional dependence and be losing our freedom. Once we really can see that we are the determined one, then we have a chance of unhooking ourselves from those forces. Now, this is a quote from a Grapevine article that Bill wrote. He goes, paradoxically, though, we can achieve no liberation from alcohol obsession until we become willing to deal with those character defects which have landed us in that helpless condition. Even to gain sobriety only, we must attain some freedom from fear, anger, and pride, from rebellion and self righteousness, from laziness and irresponsibility, from foolish rationalization and outright dishonesty. And then he says, from wrong dependencies and destructive power. You see, my dependency then becomes a demand for the claim and the possession of those people and circumstances surrounding me. So, always with dependency will come an attempt to control and have power over. That's a part of the experience we have when we're immature, when we don't grow up. Well, he goes on to say in that same article, he goes, in this freedom quest, we are always given three choices. Number one, this is door number one. I wish we had Vanna White here from Let's Make a Deal, right? Door number one. A rebellious refusal to work upon our glaring defects. This can be a ticket to destruction. And trust me, unfortunately, this happens a lot. We are phobic. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to face our demons. So we go on avoiding those. And I think that's a sure ticket to relapse. Number two, door number two, or for a time, we can stay sober with a minimum of self-improvement and settle ourselves into a comfortable but often dangerous mediocrity. I've heard people in the program say, I'm staying sober on steps 1 and 12. Well, God, there's 10 other steps involved. And in those 10 steps is where you discover and find emotional sobriety. So we're selling ourselves short with this minimum self-improvement. He goes, or we can continuously try hard for those sterling qualities. We're going to call those emotional sobriety, which can add up to greatness of spirit and action. Greatness of spirit and true and lasting freedom under God and the freedom to find and do his will. Greatness of spirit and action. I love that phrase. He goes on to say, for most of us, this last choice is ours. We must never be blinded by futile philosophy that we are just hapless victims of our inheritance, of our life experience, and our surrounding. In other words, we've got to give up the idea that we are victims. Even though some of us have been victimized, we cannot continue that. He says that these are the sole forces that make decisions for us. It's a big lie. They're not. He goes, this is not the road to freedom. He goes, we have to believe that we can really choose. That we can really choose. You cannot discover that you have a choice until you realize you don't. I'll go back to that paradoxical theory of change. You cannot discover that you have a choice until you realize that you don't. When you realize you don't is when you begin the process of having a choice. Bill said this too. He says that all of AA's 12 steps asks us to go against our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. I want you to think of ego in the way Bill is using it, not in terms of the psychological definition of it, but in terms of the 12-step definition of it is false self. Our egos are our false self, right? And the program is designed to deflate and to shatter our reliance on our false self and to now, I like to think of it as recover our true self in the process. So how do the steps work? What's the relationship between the steps? Well, each step is going to create a certain amount of charge, a certain kind of an energy that's going to result in a tension that's you can think of as a need or desire inside of you. Now, in fact, what you're going to see as I describe this, that this is what the cycle of experiences is for us human beings, is that as I sit here, if I'm satisfied, I've got no desire or want, but then all of a sudden something will show up. Maybe after I'm sitting here for an hour or so, I'll be aware that my bladder has been filling with urine. and I'm going to have the desire and need to go urinate. Well, if I function well, I'm going to pay attention to what I need. This is what we call self-regulation. I'm going to say, my God, I need to go to the restroom. I'll think about where is the bathroom. I know where it is. It's my house, so I don't have to just go and ask somebody where's the restroom at. But if I'm in a place where there's no restroom, I'll look for a bush, right? Or whatever I need to do to take care of myself. I'll go, I'll make contact with my environment and do what I need to do to satisfy that need or desire. Once I take care of my business, in this example I'm using, once I urinate and void the urine out of my bladder, I'm done. I've discharged it. I'm resolved. I'm satisfied. I'm no longer needing to urinate, and I'm available for what comes next in my life, whatever that may be. Biologically, this is a biological imperative. We run on this basis. Psychologically and spiritually, it's the same thing. Is that when we function and we're healthy, there's a seamless movement through this cycle of experience. And I think it's fascinating that Bill, in many ways, is as we go through the steps, we are recovering our ability to flow with our experience. That's the deep lesson that's taking place in the steps. Now, the way I like to think of it is that we want to feel whole, we want to feel complete, to be what we can be, and to be internally united. This is a generic human need, and it's a need that is interrupted with any idea of who you should be or what you're supposed to be or how you should feel or how you should behave. That's a surefire way to interfere with this cycle of experience. So this is a generic human need, an imperative of source. This force is intended to bring about wholeness or holiness. It's the process of differentiation that's constantly moving us in the direction to be what we can be. Goldstein, a brilliant neurologist, in the 30s recognized this. He says we have a tendency to actualize what is possible. Other people, like Maslow, described it as self-actualization. That's what Fritz Perls called it as well. So did Carl Rogers. So in the steps and how they work is a step will create, like step one, creates this charge, this tension. It creates an existential crisis. I'm powerless. My life has become unmanageable. Ernie Larson calls it a step of desperation. I am in serious trouble and I don't have within my resources. I don't have any idea of what to do about it. Everything I've tried to do about it doesn't work. That creates an existential crisis. I've got a serious problem and I have no idea what to do about it. That creates a certain tension. Can you feel that tension, that existential crisis? Well, step two comes along and says there's hope, right? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So now it discharges that energy. There's a resolution, there's hope. We can, our sanity, our good thinking is, he's using the word sanity as that, can be restored. But now in the restoration, in the resolution of that tension, a new charge emerges. What do I do to realize this hope? How do I turn that hope into a reality and not just a possibility for me? So now I get mobilized again. I get filled with energy and I mobilize myself to move towards the next step. That goes on and on and on through all of the steps. It's telling us, it's speaking deeply, pay attention to your experience and to what's coming up. And the importance of this is that the one thing that stands out, when I was in graduate school, I took this one class on personality and I did a research paper on, is there a such thing as an alcoholic or an addict personality? Nope. Uh-uh. Anybody can come alcoholic or addict, right? Equal opportunity destroyer. Doesn't matter if you're introvert, extrovert. Doesn't matter if you're type A, type B. Doesn't matter what kind of personality you have whatsoever. But what stood out, what was common across all of these things, was that alcoholics and addicts and other people that are struggling with life do not learn from their experience. We do not pay attention to our experience and process that and learn from it. That we focus on the most irrelevant variable in reality, not the most relevant one, which would help us learn about what we're doing and to start to make some corrections to our behavior. The steps are restoring our ability to learn from our experience. And this goes on and on. Step two leads to step three, making a decision. Now it says, all right, you want to have something different in your life, you're going to have to make a commitment to it. And then that commitment says, okay, we've made a commitment. What do I have to do? Make an inventory. And then what do I have to do? I share it. And so we go on and on through step seven, which is what we talked about last time. And we're at step eight now. So step seven was aiming at becoming the best possible person we could be, having the best possible attitude we can have towards ourselves, towards our relationships with others, towards our relationship with our higher power, and also towards life. And so now it says, okay, you want to have the best possible attitude? Make a list of all the persons you had harmed and become willing to make amends to them. This is going to help you become the person that you want to be, is to learn from your mistakes, to be able to identify your patterns and habits. So this step is about the development of the best possible attitude towards our relationships. That's what we're doing with step eight. So what's the therapeutic effect? Well, we're improving our personal relationships and we're becoming radically accountable for our attitudes and our behaviors. Radically accountable for our attitudes and our behaviors. By becoming accountable for our behavior, this increases our self-esteem. Dr. Nathaniel Branden was very clear that this is one of the pillars of self-esteem. In his book, The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, he said, taking responsibility for our lives, for our actions, for how we create our existence is a key to starting to feel better about ourselves. And also, this step renews our commitment to a new way of life. We're once again going into some tangible, just like step four was tangible evidence of our commitment to turning things around by sitting down and doing an inventory and sharing it. Steps 8 and 9 follow the same pattern. This is your tangible evidence of your commitment. And if you haven't done step 8, you've got to start questioning your commitment. Our dear friend Herb Kagan in Southern California, he does these year-long workshops on the 12 steps. Typically in January, he starts out with about 100 people. And these are people that are in the program and wanting to learn, right? Gets to step 4, the first real demonstration of your tangible commitment. He loses half of those people. He's down to 100. When he hits step 8, guess what happens? Another half disappear. He ends the year with 25% of the people that started do the work. Well, do you want to be part of the 25% or 75%, right? That's going to depend on what you do. Now, we're also in this step by really looking at, the harm we've done and becoming willing to make amends. We're developing the development of value of empathy in our relationships. You see, one of the things that's so true is because we become so self-focused, right? It's all about me. We lose our ability to empathize with others. For some people, it's the first time that they've been introduced to having empathy. Others, it's recovering the empathy that they've lost. Well, empathy becomes so important because to become trustworthy and a safe person, which increases our self-esteem, Being trustworthy and a safe person means that we have empathy about our impact on other people. So this is what Bill says about this step. He says it is equally necessary, and talk about as we're doing this step, that we extricate from an examination of our personal relations every bit of information about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties. Pay attention to that, right? An examination of our personal relationships, every bit of information from that, from an evaluation of that about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties. Since defective relationships with human beings have nearly always been the immediate causes of our woes, including our alcoholism. He goes on to say that no field of investigation could yield more satisfying and valuable rewards, and I'll put in an information in this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection on personal relations can deepen our insight into our basic flaws. I will add that. This is critical in being able to achieve emotional sobriety because where our emotional dependency shows up most clearly, it shows up in all kinds of other relations in our life, but where it shows up most clearly is in our relationships with others. So, emotional sobriety is about identifying our patterns and our habitual ways of thinking and feeling in our relationships. So, this is what Dr. Brandon says about this. He goes, when men and women do not attain psychological adulthood, the danger is that they expect others to assume responsibility for their existence, especially for their emotional life. When men and women do not grow up, they unconsciously expect others to assume responsibility for their existence. This is what emotional dependency looks like in a relationship. In stage two recovery, Ernie Larson defined it as this. He goes, dealing in stage two recovery, think about it synonymously with emotional sobriety, because stage two recovery is dependent on emotional sobriety. Dealing with the mountain of living is what stage two recovery is all about. Is it about getting on with life by facing those patterns, habits, and attitudes that control your life, and which, for perhaps the first time, you are clear headed, sober, or emotionally sound enough to face? Clear headed, sober, I would also say courageous and curious enough to face. Because it takes some courage to see who you're not. He goes on to say that the first step in engineering healthy relationship is to look at yourself so you can deal with the living problems that underlie addiction. In other words, you are not doing two different things when you deal with your living problems and when you work on becoming a more able and trustworthy partner in your relationship. They're the same thing. And he goes on to say this, that the first step that we take in the program is a desperation step. Until there is a first step, there is nothing. You know, we cannot. We continue to try to control something we can. But stage recovery involves taking another first step. He refers to it as the second first step. With it, you become as serious about your living patterns and habits as you were about the addiction that brought you into the program in the first place. Until the second first step happens, there is no stage two recovery and no emotional sobriety. In other words, Herb and I have talked about it as the second half of the first step, right? Being able to admit, and face that our life had become unmanageable and that this started well before our addiction started. This started early on in life with some of the ideas, experiences, conclusions we drew, all kinds of things that ended up with us becoming very much emotionally dependent and stuck in our development in terms of growing up. When we become emotionally dependent, relationships become about power rather than about love and empathy. This is what Michael Vincent Miller says. He goes, being able to distinguish the relative proportions of love and power in any relationship and act accordingly seems to me to the health of any essential to the health of any relationship. Because if somebody's acting power and I'm confusing myself that they love me with that, no, that's their emotional dependency or my emotional dependency, not just theirs. Love is based on empathic attending. And when I am emotionally dependent on you, you go out the window. It's all about me, 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 me. I don't see you as a person, as someone that I need to consider. You're now an object that I need to manipulate to get my needs met. And I do that either overtly or covertly. There are many people that are as good at manipulating someone from the underdog position as they are from the top dog position. Plain stupid, helpless, all those kinds of things. That's a manipulation too. Just like it is threatening and demanding a person do something the way you want and threatening them if they don't.
Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression.
This is the theme we need to look at when we're making a list of all people we had harmed and what we've done to harm them. It's what Hal Fritz Perls says. He says our dependency makes slaves out of us, especially if this is the dependency of our self-esteem. If you need encouragement, praise, pats on the back from everybody, then you turn everybody into your judge. And you either rebel or you fawn or become a people pleaser. Now, it's very important that when we start to see these patterns, that we understand that these patterns relate to the experiences we've had in our development. Dr. Miller says this, marriage and other adult intimacies resurrect earlier periods of crisis in the relationship between self and others. From the infant's first intimations of separateness from its parents to the adolescent's effort to consolidate a secure identity, yet remain closely connected with others. If we went back and examined how these developmental milestones were met or unmet in our life, we would get a clear understanding of how we ended up still being very, very dependent on our environment for our sense of self. There's no question about it.
Plainly, I could not avail myself to God's love until I was able to offer it back to Him by loving others as He would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependencies meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me. While those words, absolute dependence, may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped to trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others, regardless of the return to me.
So Dr. Miller says power often masquerades as love in our culture. We've fused the two. If you love me, you'll do everything I say, right? You'll give me everything I want. That's the nonsense idea that we have. He goes, it is best for everyone when the label best describes what's in the package, right? You wouldn't go to a store and say you want beef and then there's chicken inside when the label says it's beef. It says, otherwise, the confusion of love and power can be damaging to both relationship and individuals. It becomes confusing because then we lose sight of what love really is about, what mature love really is like. And that's what emotional sobriety is all about. It's about growing up. It's about understanding that authentic love is what Fromm called union with the preservation of integrity. There's connection, but we don't get lost in it. Maturity is when we learn to be able to act for ourselves without being selfish. When we learn to act for other people without losing ourselves or becoming selfless. You see, there is a role in self for love, even though we're told you have to sacrifice. That's nonsense. You got to get rid of yourself. No, you have to bring your best of yourself to love. This is it, emotional dependency. If you're not eternally showing me that you live for me, then I feel like I'm nothing. That's power. That's demands. Those are expectations. She goes on to say, we're always trying to get out of our emotional jail. Mostly we try by begging, threatening, or pleasing other people, trying to get them to let us out, trying to get them to do it for us. No one can let you out of that jail. That's your job, nobody else's. This is the way that Dr. Christopher Lasch says we demand too much of life, too much of our environment, too much of other people, and too little of ourselves. We sell ourselves short.
If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to gain emotional sobriety.
This is the formula we need to bring to our step 8. That as we've examined our relationships with others and the mistakes we've made, we are going to find that at the root of those things that we did wrong, we were trying to wrestle satisfaction, control, love, or whatever it is from the situation. And it showed up in our making these demands, having these unenforceable rules, and how we reacted when we were disappointed and when people didn't do things that we wanted them to do, or expected them to do, or we thought they should do. If you do that, if you do a thorough job, you will see how your emotional dependence has created a certain pattern in your relationships and how it's created a habitual way of thinking and feeling and reacting, especially when things didn't go the way that you wanted them to go. That in one sense, we demanded that people do what we want them to do because we needed them to be that way for us to be okay. And everything we're going to list in this step is going to point us in that direction. Not many people take this step and understand it in this way. Dr. Greenwald says this, that expectations lead to the erosion of any relationship. The myth that the resolution of loneliness will result because we have found an intimate one-on-one relationship is a cop-out. It's based on dependency. My God, you're going to let me out of my jail of where I feel so lonely and isolated. He goes, it begins a toxic process which dissipates the mutual nourishment that occurs when both people are committed to sustaining, nourishing interaction and growth of their separate selves. That's the important thing for us to do in our relationships. The way I say it, when we are dissatisfied or unhappy in our relationship, we need to take a hard look at what we expect from it and our way of being in it and giving to it. We need to become aware of our habitual ways of thinking and feeling, which give rise to these behavioral patterns. Dr. Miller says too much sentimentality about love without taking into account the inevitable workings of power tends to make people emotionally gullible and dependent. But overemphasizing power to the point of losing track of love leaves them feeling paranoid and isolated. This is the balance Bill talked about in emotional sobriety, finding the balance and understanding the difference, being able to differentiate. He goes, most relationships have become entangled in a web of need and resentment where they have lost their way. They may even have lost track of whether or not they ever really cared for each other. He goes on to say, what we want from each other seems to cause us the most anxiety and therefore the most difficulty. We tend to paint each other into separate corners from which neither can escape to reach the other in a fulfilling way. This is what happens when we get polarized. This is what happens when we make demands. This is what happens when we blame the other person for what they're doing and how they're behaving, especially when they're not doing what we expect them or want them to do. So this is what this step is all about. Self-searching, inward searching, bringing a lot of curiosity, discovery, and surprise to what we're finding out. The basis of this is that every intimate relationship must deal with the needs of each member for closeness and autonomy. And so this is an important thing to look at. How much I versus how much we do you want in your relationship? And in all my work with couples, almost every argument I see them having is really a negotiation of how much separateness versus how much togetherness they're going to have. One person always seems to want more togetherness. The other person seems to want more separateness. It is never resolved by giving a person more togetherness that's asking for more togetherness. And vice versa. It's never resolved by giving a person who's saying they need more separateness, giving them more separateness or individuality. The opposite is true. My mentor, Dr. Kempler, was so astute when he observed that to be more personal in a relationship, we have to stop taking things personally. And furthermore, he went on to say that separateness is not a disruption of togetherness or connection. It's just another dimension of it. That separateness is not a disruption of connection. It's just another dimension of connection. This is Dr. Harriet Lerner, and she says, learning to observe and to change our part in relationship patterns goes hand in hand with an increased sense of personal responsibility in every relationship that we are in. She goes on to say this. She goes, we cannot make another person change his or her steps to an old dance, but if we change our own steps, the dance no longer can continue in the same predictable patterns. Dr. Brannon says this, he says, autonomous individuals understand that other individuals do not exist merely to satisfy their needs. That's what the result of this step is, by the way, as this step. We get to realize this, that we've accepted the fact that no matter how much love and caring exists between persons, we are each of us in the ultimate sense responsible for ourselves. We are responsible to our partners, not for them. An autonomous individual is one who does not experience his or her self-esteem continually in question or in jeopardy. His or her worth is not a matter of continuing doubt. The source of approval resides within the self, not in the other person. It is not at the mercy of every encounter with another person. See, that's what freedom looks like. That's what true emotional freedom. This is what the steps are designed to help us achieve, this level of emotional autonomy. I love this. Byron Katie simply, summarizes this in one statement. It only takes one clear person to have a good relationship. Only takes one of us, one clear person to have a relationship. So the bottom line here is that romantic love is for grown-ups. It is not for children in the literal sense and also in the psychological sense. Not for those who, regardless of age, still experience themselves as children. And Dr. Greenwald says this. He goes, one of the hallmarks of creative intimacy is the absence of shoulds or must or other demands on ourselves or others. You see, emotional dependency creates a lot of shoulds and a lot of demands, a lot of unenforceable rules, because we think if that we have to have all of these things go our way for us to be okay. And so we generate this whole list of things. And then in our relationships, we expect people to adhere to these rules if they loved us. Well, that's nonsense. That's not what love is about. You've heard Virginia Cheer calls it the clutch. She says we blackmail other people. The program and in the rooms we hear about taking hostages. A true healthy relationship has room for two people and is not riddled with rules about how people should behave. In fact, that's the new book I'm working on right now, Room Enough for Two and Room Enough for All of Us, Emotional Sobriety and Relationships. So that's the book that we're referring to, or that I've been referring to, and that I recently published about the 12 Essential Insights. On Thursday nights, we have an emotional sobriety workshop. I'm sure somebody will post that. And before the workshop, there is a small study group that gets together at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every week, I'm in there once a month to offer consultations for people that are struggling. And there's right now, they're doing a book study and some other great stuff. It also gives you access to all of my talks and DVDs and other programs that are not public. So here's my contact information. And now we'll go ahead and open this up for some comments or remarks.